everyone. I'm Christine Tully, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. Welcome to episode 256, Keep an Origin Story of Your Writing. Origin stories have been a top of mind issue for me as I've thought through my own scholarship because so many of our projects they center on the idea that we've come up with an original idea. That's why our research is here. That's why we're communicating it to people in conferences. We're putting it out in publications. And one of the things that has really brought that to mind, if we think through some of the issues that happen with scholarly writing, is that people are watching us. They're watching the type of writing that we do. Different parties own some of our writing at different points in time. And there's always the question now in the age of AI is if you actually wrote the writing yourself, right? So in that vein, this episode is part of the 2025, the Big Rhetorical Podcast Carnival. We've been part of this carnival for several years now. If you've not heard of the Big Rhetorical Podcast, we will put a link in the show notes to it. But this is basically a group of podcasts that center on rhetoric, writing, publication, scholarship type issues. And this year's theme is Untethering Surveillance, Power Dynamics, Emerging Technologies, and Social Control. And what better issue to think about the origins or the originality of our writing than under this mechanism, because we certainly are undergoing surveillance at many points in our faculty writing careers, if not all of them. And certainly this applies to graduate students as well in your future career. So one of the things that I started thinking about are the different ways that different stakeholders have our writing. They either own it outright, we've signed over the rights to it, they own part of it. And then the second question is, how can you prove the origin of your projects? Meaning, were you the person that actually wrote it? How do we know that that original idea centers with you? For the record, I realize there is a whole conversation about this in terms of, do we really own any of our ideas and all of that? So I don't want to dump into that here because, of course, we have a podcast that we try to limit them to no longer than 15 minutes since we kind of do short and sweet. So one of the things that I started thinking about is, okay, what are the buckets where someone else has our writing, or we have some kind of a tension between if we created the writing ourselves and if we are, somebody else, they need us to prove that we created it. So here's a couple of things to think about. Of course, universities can do some sort of an intellectual property stake over our written work. They can make claim over it. Depending on the university, depending on the policies. But for example, if you generate some results in a lab that's on university property and then you publish those results, some universities require that intellectual property right to be retained with them. So it's something to think about there, like where was the research generated? Who technically has a right to ownership of that research? So that's certainly one. Another one would be more obvious, meaning once you agree to publish a manuscript in a scholarly journal or with a book publisher, a lot of times you're transferring rights, either publication or copyright, over to a publisher. Some agreements, and this is a one thing, I just looked at a book contract for myself recently, and I really read this part carefully to see like who actually retains original ownership, right? So that's something to look at. We certainly have things like plagiarism detection software. So we might think that, hey, that's something that only applies to the students. It doesn't necessarily apply to me. Certainly graduate students, this may apply to you, probably already does. But also there's sort of this permanent record of how many times your work is put through one of these detectors. And one of the places where this is increasingly being used is, for example, in job search materials. So, for example, looking for like a fraudulent CV, that might be something that could be creating a permanent record. So that detection software, including even for some scholarly journals that might run manuscripts through plagiarism detection software. Part of submitting to some journals means you're agreeing to the way that they process that work. So that would be a spot where maybe your work is now living in some sort of database for one of those tools. Same thing with AI detection tools about scanning and storing some faculty generated content. And also, tenure and promotion committees. So they're already looking at our originality of our work. They're looking at attribution. They're looking at, if there's a co-authored piece, who did more of the work. all of these issues are about origin story to some extent. So who originally made the idea and then who actually owns it. So one of the things that I want to talk through in this episode are four different ways that you can keep track of the origin story of your projects if you ever need it. But I would argue it's also kind of fun to capture part of your writing process. So there's kind of a dual purpose here. And in some ways, you're providing a lens for other people to surveil your writing project as it develops, but that can be helpful in the case of trying to prove ownership or something like that. So some of the ways that I do this, and some of these are not new, some of them are. One would be the old school way of dating all your drafts and saving multiple drafts of your manuscript or multiple versions. So dated drafts, what I'm showing on screen right now, if you're listening audio only, is just strictly a hard drive with a bunch of files that are dated. And so I know, for example, a recent book that I did, which was an edited collection on faculty writing support with Jackie Wells and Laura Sutherland, that draft, that's in several Microsoft Word drafts. And it's dated, and you can kind of see, okay, this, roughly every 6 months or so, there's some new draft of this project. You can kind of trace the development of the project through multiple stages. So that's one way, just to prove like, hey, we have these drafts. Now, obviously, a draft itself can be falsified. There's lots of ways that this is not a foolproof method to prove that you wrote something. But what it does do is it will show differences. So you can compare drafts and even look at differences in ideas or phrasing or things like that that might be helpful in any kind of case if you would have to ever prove something that you were the person that actually developed a certain idea. Another thing that I've done, which I really like the exposure that this does, but a second recommendation I would have is to capture your writing process in some way. And in my case, for one of my books, I made it 100% public. So a book that I worked on, this one is called Productivity, Professionalism, and Parenting in Academia. This book was published by Routledge in 2025. And what I did for this was a book where I asked academic mothers to capture time use and how they found time to write for scholarship while they were still parenting, juggling family responsibilities and all that. It did not seem fair to me to write an entire book on this without showing my process as an academic mom creating it. So I made a website. It's just a WordPress website. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. You could check it out. But my Rec Comp Moms project had a page on, that's what the colon title, or the title after the colon subtitle was. And one of the things that I did here is I took pictures of my writing process throughout the entire time of doing the book. I did not take one every day, but I definitely took one every few weeks. And I loaded them all in here as a slideshow gallery, and you can see multiple pictures. So those people that are looking on YouTube can see all kinds of things like whiteboards where you can see where I physically like moved around pieces of reorganizing a chapter. You can see some audio notes. You can see me writing in the library multiple days, the view out the window of the library where I wrote, me sitting on my daughter's bed, And a lot of these pictures show actual portions of the book in draft stage before they became final. So all of those pictures have captured this process for a long time. And the other thing is this is a public website. So this website, it's been going since 2018 approximately. So that's a very long time. That's 7 years of data that's out here that anybody could watch me making this book all year long, all month long if they wanted to. And the other thing that I ended up doing for a conference on sound studies is I actually recorded for 1 year sounds of me writing this book. So fingers on the keyboard, what music was I listening to? I play guitar, so some of my guitars in there where I kind of thought about some different things while I was playing the guitar. So these are not unique ways to capture, but they do provide a much richer experience where I could prove probably something on every single page in that book was an idea that I came up with, how I came up with it, what I was thinking about before I ever got there, and how it ended up looking the way that it did. So this is something that I think is really valuable for ourselves as writers. I mean, I know we're talking about surveillance on this episode, but honestly, I don't necessarily care if somebody's watching me do this. I made it public because of the goal of the project. But the other thing I really like about it is that in general, now I'm capturing my writing process for all of my projects because I find it really interesting to do a self-study of how I'm getting some work done. So my new book that I've talked about several times on the podcast is a book about sabbaticals. I'm also capturing everything for that book, because that's going to be really important to kind of show how the book was developed. It's part of the thing that I do with my research. And for anybody, whether you're doing a more, quantitative study or whatever you're doing, it's pretty important to capture some of those insights about data sets and numbers and things like that, which you may be doing. But you might also think about some visual or audio ways to capture that. Another thing that you could think about doing, which is not super novel, but you may have this, but you might think about a way to kind of store this. I also store a lot of my notes as I think through different projects in a tool called Penzu. We've done plenty of episodes on Penzu. It's Penzu, and what I'm showing on screen right now are two screenshots. One is a note where I was revising the order of my table of contents for that book on Retcomp Moms. And then a second note is one about my new sabbatical book where I'm trying to trace, like, how was this book written from beginning to end? So I'm starting to put some notes in there so I don't forget to capture that process. These notes are, unlike that website I just mentioned, are not public, but I do have them. So if I ever needed to produce pages and pages of how I got to where I got to in a book, I have it. So it's not undergoing surveillance in a public eye. However, if I would get in a scenario where somebody's sort of watching my writing or wanting me to prove something, I'd be able to do it. And then finally, a fourth way that I would recommend thinking about ownership and origin stories of ideas is, of course, we've been doing this for a long time with presentations. So a lot of times we'll present pieces of the work before it comes out. And that's certainly one way to kind of show, like, hey, I'm working on this idea even before the publication. That's not new. And again, that offers another opportunity for surveillance by our peers, where, somebody's watching us produce writing and we're, maybe thinking through an idea. This is a spot where you can kind of lay a claim to an idea early on. So, for example, one thing that's shown on my slides, if you're not watching on YouTube, is a slideshow I did for Ohio State Project Narrative. So that was a group that I was working with on my sabbatical, and that was some of the research for an article I'm working on about how faculty write their dream publications. So, I don't have that piece written yet. I have data, I'm working on it. So that's a way for me to get those ideas out publicly. So at least somewhere I'm connected to that idea. Another way to do that would be through a public scholarship venue. So, for example, I do write regularly for Inside Higher Education, and one of the benefits of doing public scholarship is it's public, it's out there, it's kind of like a mini version, maybe a more accessible version of something that you're working on. But it allows for, I would argue, surveillance in a good way, where lots of readers can kind of hear about what you're thinking. You can get connected with others. I have an article screenshot that's shown about helping faculty increase their research impact, which is something I haven't written on other than this particular article. But to me, when I'm thinking about things with surveillance, putting something out in Inside Higher Ed, which is exactly about surveillance, is kind of a good meta way to think through this topic, because that particular piece is talking about different ways to get faculty interested in making their work more accessible, more viewed, but also some of that is in documenting origin. So, for example, one of the things I talked about in that article was making sure that you have an ORCID ID. An ORCID ID is a unique identifier. That is part of the process, that it would travel with your scholarship. So when we're thinking about, if this is something where technologies are helping us, sometimes, they're not always, but sometimes helping us, an ORCID ID might be one way to kind of attach your projects to that, to keep claim over those and to make sure that you're tracing that origin story of those ideas. One other way to think about this that I want to throw out there as a resource is, I've mentioned our partnership with the Textbook and Academic Authors Association in past episodes, and I'm happy to announce that they are returning for a sponsorship for the year. And I talk about all the time why I love this organization. You've heard this on many, many episodes. So I will say this, this particular organization I've mentioned, very, very cheap to join, lots of resources, templates, etc. But here's one thing in relation to surveillance that I think is crucial. So one of the things that you may have heard about if you've been paying attention to academic news is that there is a case against Anthropic. So Anthropic is one of the organizations, the companies that owns tools like Claude, which would be an AI tool. And so there is a whole a whole way where academic authors can essentially fight in this lawsuit, and you can get possibly some retribution for if any of your work was being used by any of these AI tools. So one of the things that Textbook and Academic Authors Association is doing is that they are talking about a claims process for how you can actually claim money to or claim damages for the work that you are doing. So there is going to be a webinar on Wednesday, December 10th at 2 from 2 to 3 p.m. This is in 2025. And this is open to members and non-members of Textbook and Academic Authors Association. However, if you join TAA, you can join for $25 for a whole year. You heard that right, $25. So use capital D, capital P 25 in the coupon code. I'll have this in the show notes, but this is another reason to join, because one of the things that this organization is doing that I'm interested in is they are staying on top of things like when AI tools use our work without us knowing. How many times were our articles loaded into AI that we weren't aware of, and they're being used for purposes? So this is a conversation that I think we want to stay on top of. And I know that Textbook and Academic Authors Association, aside from all the other reasons why I love them, they are staying on top of the conversation. They are actively involved in fighting it along with many other organizations. So if you're interested in that, I will put all of that in the show notes, or you can just check out Textbook and Academic Authors Association and join it for $25 for a whole year, capital D, capital P, 25, all smushed together in the coupon code. Other things that are helpful, I think, in our journey as we're thinking about origin stories and getting some writing done. As this episode is being recorded, definitely join us for our Monday, December 1st webinar. So this is 2025 when this is getting recorded. Monday, December 1st, we're having a free webinar at noon Eastern time on maintaining writing momentum in December. December is one of those months where a lot of people view it as kind of a throwaway, where you're not getting a lot of work done. But this webinar is actually one of the most popular free ones we do throughout the entire year, because we talk about some strategies that actually work within sort of the holiday mixed energy of the month, and the recognition that you probably don't have a lot of days to work, but you have some. And so if you want to join us, you can register to attend live or get the recording. Everybody going to our events gets the recording. One final reminder, we are getting close to the end of our holiday coaching special, where all of our hours are the cheapest they will be for the end of the whole year. And you can buy hours. You can buy 11 hours, get one free, buy 15 and get three free, or buy 20 and get five free. And they are all discounted by $15 an hour. So as this is getting run in the fall of 2025, if you're interested in that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at Christine@defendpublishlead.com. Or you can go to defendpublishlead.com and click the button to schedule a free consultation. So that's one way that you can talk through how we might support your writing projects. Happy writing this week.